Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Betty Casey. I'm editor of TulsaKids magazine, and I'm here for our February edition of Dismantling Racism. We partnered with OSU Tulsa and the Tri-City Collective to bring you this monthly series. And I'm very excited today to talk with the authors and illustrators of a new children's book called Opal's Greenwood Oasis. It's set in Tulsa in the Greenwood area. And that's all I'm going to tell you about it right now, because I want to let our authors and illustrator talk a little bit about the book. But first I want to introduce everyone, and I'm going to scoot you over so I can read my one thing I do want to remind you, anyone who's watching may use the chat feature to ask questions or comment on anything that we're discussing here today. So please feel free to do that. Okay, I want to introduce Quraysh Ali Lansana first. Welcome, Quraysh. He is normally the one asking the questions and doing the heavy lifting in this series. So I'm it for today. So Quraysh is the author of 8 books of poetry, including The Skin of Dreams, New and Collected Poems, 1995 to 2018 from Calliope, in addition to textbooks and works for children, including A Gift from Greensboro, which I also have, and it is also illustrated by Skip Hill. He's written that book. He's a former faculty member of both the writing program of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and the drama division of the Juilliard School. Lansana served as director of the Gwendolyn Brooks Center for Black Literature and Creative Writing at Chicago State University and was an associate professor of English and creative writing. He currently fills several roles at Oklahoma State University, Tulsa. He's acting director of the Center for Truth, Racial Healing and Reconciliation, writer in residence for the Center for Poets and Writers, lecturer in English and Africana Studies. He's also a Tulsa Artist Fellow and the co-founder of Tri-City Collective. So welcome, Q.
Thanks for having me, Betty.
Next guest is the co-author of Opal's Greenwood Oasis, and she is also a poet. Najah-Amatullah Hylton teaches English in Oklahoma City, so she's joining us from Oklahoma City, and I hope you're warm and safe over there. Her goal is to encourage kids to let their creativity work for them instead of getting them in trouble. She also seeks to bridge the gap between teachers, students, and the community. Hylton has written for several magazines and online publications, The Loop magazine, OKC Net, Vein magazine, Urban Roots, and Soul Medicine among them. Her first poetry book, The Risk to Bloom, was published in 2014. In 2015, Hylton wrote the poem Black Future for the hip hop artist, is it JB? JB?
AB.
Okay. I did ask my millennial children, but didn't get an answer back on that yet. So, thank you. Who turned the poem into an album in the Black Future? There's a place for so dangerously absurd. I'm sorry, I messed that up. There's a place so dangerously absurd. Released in 2016, Hylton is also a member of Tri-City Collective, an education and arts group. And last but not least, we have Skip Hill, who is an artist and the illustrator for our book today. Skip is a mixed media visual artist in Tulsa, Oklahoma, whose art is in public and private collections throughout the United States, Europe, and Latin America. His early inspiration for art making was established in childhood through a love of reading, and when his father introduced Hill to the collage works, and you will see this in his illustrations if you're not familiar, Ramar Bearden. Beyond his artistic innovation, Bearden's activism and commitment to the civil rights movement influenced Hill's commitment to using art and art education as a vehicle for affirming positive personal and social change. That commitment and inspiration is at the heart of his process in every line of the illustrations for Opal's Greenwood Oasis. So welcome all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you to OSU Tulsa, and thank you to the Tri-City Collective for helping us bring this great conversation to all of you. I want to start out just asking, I'll start out talking about the collaboration. Q and Najah, how did you, you're both poets. How did you come to collaborate on this children's book?
My answer is shorter, so I'll say mine first, and then I'll let you talk about where his came from. He approached me and asked me if I wanted to create it with him, and since we'd been working together on projects before, I said sure, so we went in on it together. I had interest not just because of my proximity to Tulsa. I used to do poetry at spots in Tulsa, just like I did in Oklahoma City back before I had a kid. And so I was interested in the history there, but I've always been interested in Black history and Black towns. Not that Tulsa technically was a Black town, but I mean Greenwood district kind of was its own thing. So that concept of the way we strived in what people consider to have been problematic situations like segregation. We kind of consider segregation to have been bad, but the way we as Black people thrived in those segregated times has always been interesting to me. So I was more than excited to jump in on that project with Q when he asked me if I wanted to do it with him.
Okay, thank you. Q?
Well, first of all, as Najah mentioned, I've known her for years now. And she's a wonderful writer, a wonderful poet, and a wonderful educator. And I think a part of my vision, I think, and that became our vision, our collective vision, all three of us, for this book, I think, was one, that we wanted to make sure that we celebrated Greenwood and what it was, as Najah mentioned, one of the most thriving, economically vibrant Black communities in the world, in the face of Jim Crow, in the face of some of the worst or most severe Jim Crow laws anywhere in the country. And that Black excellence, as you've heard me say before, Betty, and I know Skip and Najah have, that we wanted to make sure that we celebrate this Black excellence over Black pain. And so celebrating and exploring this district and what it was and how vibrant it was for almost 2 decades in a place where they couldn't go south of 2nd Street without a white escort. But you'd only go south of 2nd Street if you had to work. Otherwise, you had everything that you need, which is something that, Najah and I wrote, that Opal voices in the book. We had everything that they needed in Greenwood because they had to have everything that they needed in Greenwood because they had to take care of themselves, of one another. And so out of that necessity, also with a great deal of amazing entrepreneurial spirit, blossomed this community and that was safe and thriving and amazing. And then it was destroyed because it was safe and thriving and amazing, and because all that was made by Black hands. So that's a big part of it for us. I also think, as Najah reminded me the other day, there are more lead characters in children's books that are animals than are children of color, right? And that is a sad truth. And so we wanted to make sure that this book, which was really a spin-off idea from a graphic novel that we had started working on, that this book was a girl forward, that had a girl lead character, and that we went through the neighborhood and through the day, Memorial Day, 1921, with Opal, right? And then lastly, and I'll stop here, that, as you noted earlier, I had the great honor to beg this dude, Skip Hill, to illustrate a gift from Greensboro for Penny Candy Books, which is an Oklahoma City based children's book company, publishing books for children of color. And so I had the great privilege of cajoling Skip into doing that book with me, and then to be able to track him down again and convince him in 2 different backyards over cocktails that he needed to do this book was also was also something special, so something that was really important to me because the dude is brilliant, and I knew that he would put both feet into the work, not only in terms of his artistry, but in terms of the authenticity of the period. Because of what we did, what I'd experienced with Greensboro, I knew that he would dig into the history because he's as much of a history geek as Najah and myself. So, and so it's come together, and I couldn't be any more thrilled.
It's a wonderful book, and it's beautifully illustrated. So let's talk about the illustrations a little bit. Skip, uh, it's not easy to illustrate a children's book. The images have as much to do with the story as the text, and it's a lot. It's a lot of art that you're creating. Um, did you know what you were getting into with this collaboration, even though you had collaborated on the other book uh, with you before? Talk a little bit about getting into the art and accepting this as a project and taking this on.
Well, I didn't really have the option of saying no. It's almost as if I came to Tulsa to create this book, certainly to collaborate on the project. And I really believe it's a place for this book. You had to be here. I don't know that I could have done this living in Oklahoma City or Dallas, or yeah, you could do a lot of online research, but for me, it was just as important to walk around the community, to talk to people in the community, and I knew going into it that the research would probably be the bulk of my time spent on the book. Once I gathered all the research, that the producing the book on the physical way, sitting down to draw it, write it, pull it together, that would be the fun part. That's the mechanics of it. But really, in order to even begin with all of that, I needed to get a thorough background. So one, I would know what the heck I'm talking about. And it's very important to have historical accuracy. And so a lot of my research involved going back to the late 1900s, early 1920s, and doing research on what African-American life was like during that period, not just in Oklahoma, but throughout the country. And I specifically looked at rural life for African-Americans, studying the businesses that were here. You know, it was an education for me as well. One of the most fascinating things I found in the course of pulling the book together and doing the research were the number of people when I would mention I'm working on this children's book about the Tulsa Race Massacre. And everyone who would say, you know, I didn't know about that until the Watchmen series on HBO. We never heard about that in school. Black and white and all ethnicities of people who I would share this project that I'm working on would say, man, I never heard that in high school. I never even heard it in college. How could this be? So I didn't have a thorough education about it, but thankfully through the authors, particularly Q, and our conversations before while working on Greensboro, he mentioned this idea that he had for a book. I think initially it was a graphic novel, but transitioned into this book. So he's the person that got me to thinking, digging, researching on this epic event, but even more so the community that existed before. And what I really loved was when he said, made it very clear, listen, we want the focus of this book to come from Black excellence, Black joy. We don't want any flames or fire or burning or pain. That's not what this is going to be about. It's about the vibrancy of the people. And so with that as my focus, that's how I approached the book. So everything from looking at what a kitchen would look like in the 1920s, what the trucks look like. Opal's father drives a truck. So what is it? I figured he wouldn't necessarily have a brand new truck. So what does a 1916 Ford pickup truck look like? You have to Google and find that out. So what was the style of fashions that people wore, everyday people, when you were working? If you were a mechanic, if you were a laborer, how did you dress? So you look at overalls, you look at the newsboy caps that they wore. And so I had to immerse myself in that world between well-to-do African-American Tulsans, Black Tulsans, and more working class Black Tulsans. So a lot of research, just wanting to get the details right in order to place the viewer into that time period. So it was a wonderful challenge. I enjoyed it very much. I'm richer for the experience and certainly wiser and from the experience.
Thank you. I want to talk to you a little bit later about some of that research and how that how you pulled in some of the collage and the colors that you use. So I want to talk about that in a minute. Najah and Q, I wanted to ask you, in your research, did you do a lot of research for the book, and did anything surprise you in what you found or impact you in any way?
Q's the main researcher. I will say that's always been what's super interesting to me is how just things have evolved, right? And one of the first questions that I remember us sitting around a table and talking about, worrying about Opal, because her big brother works for a newspaper, and knowing what kind of personality I wanted her to have, I was like, okay, well, she likes to read. Would they have done things like reading contests? Would they have had a library? Would our school have had a library? Would there have been a public library? So like that was one of the first things that I was like, we got to figure. We spent an hour looking that up one afternoon. But Q's the main researcher. I'll toss that to him.
And to piggyback and also just to clarify slightly, so yeah, her older brother Sammy is a newspaper delivery boy. So
what did I say?
You said he works for a newspaper.
He does.
He
So he does. I just wanted to make sure we were clear there. So, and I think in why, not to stop squash what you said in any way, Najah, but I think because he delivers Black newspapers in Black Tulsa, the Chicago Defender, the New Amsterdam News out of New York, what's coming out of Detroit, I can't think of the name of it right now, but and of course the Tulsa Star, a Black Dispatch out of Oklahoma City. Because he's tying these up and delivering them through the neighborhood, it to me leads to what Najah would call a precociousness in Opal, because he's always got language. He always has something to read. There's always something to read around. So she might help him roll the newspapers and see a picture of an ad for the new dress of the day, or a story about an animal somewhere, right? And so she's curious, she's precocious, and a part of that is because her brother delivers newspapers, and he also rides his bike through the neighborhood, through the community, which also I think piques her interest, her curiosity in not only wanting to learn how to ride a bike, which is a big part of the story, but to ride that bike through this neighborhood, right, that she's ridden in the toting truck through, she's walked through, but riding her bike is a whole different kind of independence and exhilaration and freedom that her brother does every day. Her brother experiences every day. But yeah, back to your question, we have been, between Najah and other members of the Tri-City Collective, we've been researching Greenwood. I personally have been researching Greenwood for 17, 18 years. And there are others in our collective that have been researching as long or almost as long. And so that authenticity, as Skip put it, was very important to Najah and to all of us, right? About, are we being historically accurate, even in terms of Mrs. Little's hair salon is actually next to the Stratford Hotel, which is next to the Tulsa Star office. Like, even literally being that authentic in replicating the neighborhood. And that was important to all of us. So yeah, research informs every aspect of this book, but we also, at the same time, Opal had to be friendly, welcoming, kids had to want to go on this bike ride with her and be engaged with her, and empathetic when she fell, you know, and like her, right?
Yeah, I think all kids will respond to Opal's sense of, that's what I initially felt when I read the book, that sense of independence that she had as a kid. Sometimes I'll see a kid out riding a bike and I'll think, you know, they just look so free, and you know they're having fun and they're going somewhere, and it's exciting to them, and that first taste of independence, you guys really nailed that. And I just that just came through, that and the sense of community in the book came through so well to me. So let's go back to Skip. Can you talk a little bit, if you want to talk about your process? I know you have a video, and I'd like to ask you about your color choices. There's distinct color palette, and I love the collage, and I love Opal's face in this book. It's so engaging, and there's something to look at in your artwork. So I think, I mean, you've got to get this book, even if it's just for the artwork. The story's amazing, but the artwork is truly amazing. So can you talk a little bit about your art? And I know you have the video you can show too.
Sure. You know, it started off with Najah's daughter as being the spiritual totem that I was looking for to get me started. And it starts like it would for any project, drawing, sketching. I probably had about 12 different versions of her that I started working on, but I got to the plats pretty quick. There's a number of famous photographs taken during the WPA period in the 1920s and 30s of beautiful Black girls with very dignified images with the plats. And I have these images in my memory of early photographs, even within my own family. My family's primarily from Texas on my mother's side. So I had images and archives and things I could pull from as far as how a Black girl would wear her hair then. It wouldn't be in an afro. It wouldn't be in a lot of the styles that you see today. It was usually simple. So establishing her was the first order of business. And so I did. I looked at images of how Black girls or how Black people were rendered and portrayed in media during that time. And it wasn't always positive. And many times it would, you know, the images of Black girls and Black children and Black boys were used to sell advertising products like soap and toothpaste. And so they were often used in that time period. And again, we're thinking about the birth of modern advertising. The images were often derogatory. So the challenge for me was to pull from my own memories, resources, and then those more dignified images that I could find, and to create and craft a young girl who, for me also from the very beginning, once you read the manuscript, is a precocious girl. She's probably the first girl to have her hand up when a question is asked by the teacher. That's how I saw her. She wants to be just like her big brother and just as free and independent as he is. But we all know that, no, you're baby girl. You got to wait your turn. You can't do that. Keeping in mind that she's in a safe environment. And part of that safe environment was keeping an eye on your kids, where they were going, what they could do, so they would stay out of trouble and that they wouldn't be harmed. So her face came to me after a number of sketches, just drawing on paper, and then just kind of pulling it together off. I do like to let people know, and the viewers and readers specifically, that I don't draw the book from the first page to the back page. I go to the page that I have the clearest vision for first. And that could be in the middle of the book. It could be towards the end of the book. So it's not in order. As a kid, I would wonder, how do children's book producers, how do they make the book? Do they start with page 1 and just go all the way through? Or do they? So I do go from, oh, I know what this page looks like. I can see how that looks like. It's page 8, but I'm gonna go ahead and start on that. And then I'll go to page 3, and then I'll go to page 15 in order to pull it all together. So I start with sketches. And with this book in particular, I like the idea of, even though it's a historical, we're looking at history. And I've shared before that typically when we look at history, we see images in black and white and in sepia tones. And oftentimes when I look at an old image, when we look at an old image that's in black and white and sepia, it's hard to see their present day humanity, or what they really look like. If they look frozen in stone in black and white. And so I did want to bring a more vibrant colors, a vibrant color scheme, and also the idea of mixing photographs, drawings, and really nice bright colors, because the fact of the matter is their life was just as bright and colorful as a sunny day in 1921 as our lives are today. You pick the color of a dress because you like the color. You pick the color of a vase, a wallpaper, or whatever it is, shoes, a hat. You picked it because of the color. And so it was very important for me to inject color, and not just your primary colors, but nice, bright, juicy colors that would capture their energy in their present day contemporary circumstances. So once the drawings are drawn, and I collected a file of images that I saved and referred to. And so then it becomes a matter of like a kid, and making the art taps into my inner child. You start cutting and moving things around. Does this go here, or would it look better on this side? Do I have the car here? Do I place Opal here? Do I put her in front of the house? Where do I put her next in relation to her father as they're talking about the picnic later on that day? How do I portray Dick Rowland when he's mentioned briefly in the book? And it's brief, but it's pivotal in the book. How do I do that? So it's a matter of moving things around on paper. And then when something clicks, I lock it in, and then I start gluing everything down. And so it really is like putting a puzzle for the children who are interested in how it's done. In many ways, it's like taking a bunch of paper, and it's like putting a puzzle together. Then when you have the puzzle just the way that you want it, you glue it down. Now, you could have something that was printed out on a copier next to something that I actually drew on a piece of paper. Then I put those two together, and it works. And that comes mostly from my own experience. But the whole time that I'm working on the illustrations, I'm thinking about how they look to the reader, and particularly children. But I also want it to be interesting for adults who read to the children as well. And that's a big part of my process. Just taking different elements. I often refer to like making a gumbo, taking different elements, little this, little that, little this, pour it all into the pot and season it just right. And you have a wonderful, wonderful project.
That's great. Thank you. Did you want to show one of the illustrations? You guys want to?
I can actually share with you. So one thing I do as part of my art process, not just with this book, but even with my fine art that I do, is I make little videos along the way, archival things just for me to refer to later on. So I had made this video some early on in the process when I was just doing sketches, and had a little talk as I was thinking out loud about it. And I came across it at one point. I thought, I need to share this with people, because I'm always fascinated with whether you're an author, an actor, an architect. I like to know the backstage stuff. It's great to see the final product, but I like the backstage stuff. So at this, I'll share with you an early drawing.
Kids like to see the back.
Working out, just kind of working out some of the things here. So let me see if I can get that going here.
Children love to see that too, the backstage.
I know they do. I know they do. get some details in here. So in doing the research for these drawings, it's been incredible to explore the 1920s, the 1900s, in the context of looking at things like clothing and styles, and doing a lot of extensive research on what people were wearing, what did people eat, how did girls wear their hair, how did boys dress. And of course, a lot of this is through the internet and the search engines there. And it's been quite a fascinating observation of mine in the course of, again, so when you Google Black boys eating, 19th century, 1920s, in the images of Black children, Black boys in particular, eating watermelon, on postcards. How are we doing this? It's fascinating just to see what comes up in search engines when you're trying to find images of Black people, 1900s, and then certainly up to 21. But there are some amongst that, once you put in different tag words, you find some beautiful, exquisite, elegant photographs that manage to capture the dignity of Black people, even in what in most cases very dire daily circumstances. And yet somewhere, someplace, was this place, Greenwood, on Saturdays in Greenwood, children run and ride through the streets.
That was cool. I love seeing how the person grew out of the out of your pen.
The tangle of lines.
Tangle of
Yeah.
lines. That was
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, Q and Najah, I'd like to talk to you a little bit. You're both poets, and Q, you mentioned both of you talked about words and the importance of words in the lives of the children in the book, Opal and her brother. Can you talk a little bit about that? Did you grow up with a lot of books and words in your life? And what would you recommend for parents who may want their children to become poets or writers, or just to be lovers of literature?
Oh, I love this question. I haven't had this one before. So I grew up a reader. I don't actually know. I do know that my grandfather, in the summertime, my grandfather would take me to the library, and he's who like facilitated me getting my library card, and he like basically whenever I was hanging out at his house while my mom was at work, he would take me and I would get new books, and that was, one of our regular outings. But in addition to that, I mean, because I think a lot of parents take their kids to the library, that doesn't necessarily mean that the kid is gonna read. So I think that one of the things that teachers and parents can do is figure out what kind of story your kid likes. You know, some people are, as adult readers are, right? Some people are nonfiction people. My best friend loves memoirs. I'm cool with a memoir, but if we're being honest, like YA fantasy is where I'm stuck at. Like I'm 32 years old and I'm still reading YA fantasy like I'm 16. So like, you know, find what a person likes, and that will be what will keep them reading. And that's also what'll build fluency and things like that, right? So there are, I think we also kind of unintentionally market stuff to certain age groups, right? So we are like, oh, it's about magic, so that's for little kids. Well, not all little kids want to talk about magic. Some little kids want to read nonfiction, you know, some little kids want to read biographies. And so finding out what your little kid likes, and that said, some 60-year-olds want to read fantasy. And so finding the like, getting books in their hands, and frequency. I also think modeling, it's easier. Sorry if y'all can hear my daughter over there. It's easier when they see adults reading as well. And so whatever you can do to keep yourself reading too will help. I also think this is something I haven't even had a reason to talk about in a long time, although it's in one of the long versions of my bio. I think one of the reasons I got into poetry and things like that is because of all the school plays and things you do as a kid. I was always the kid who had my own lines and everybody else's lines memorized. You know, I was always that kid. And I'll never forget having Langston Hughes's Mother to Son, which I used to swear was titled Crystal Stare because that line is repeated so many times. I have it mostly memorized to this day because I performed it in, no, I didn't perform it. I don't even know what my part was in that particular Black History play, but that poem was so good. And the kid who performed it so well that life for me ain't been no crystal stare. So I think that was part of, you know, what made me continue to love it. And you know, they don't do adult community plays, but you can do spoken word. And I went to speech competitions and stuff in middle school, and I don't know if those exist for kids as much as they used to, but I used to go to a speech competition every spring all the way through ninth grade, from fifth grade to ninth grade. So thanks for that question. I haven't been asked that like ever.
Thank you for that answer. That was interesting, and it goes to the point that we need to educate the whole child, right? That we need those things. We need the arts. We need poetry. We need the spoken word. We need all of that in our schools. Q, what about you?
Well, Najah just handled that eloquently and pretty comprehensively. I will share a few personal sort of things in terms of attempting to address your question. But before I do, I have to share something with all of you that that I hadn't learned about before till Lori saw this. So I'm working with another Tulsa artist fellow named Joel Daniel Phillips, who's a draftsman, an outstanding draftsman, outstanding drawer. And he and I are working on a project together. Joel has uncovered a bunch of killed negatives from the Farm Bureau administration from the Depression era. The government sent photographers, Dorothea Lange being the most famous of those photographers, right, who were sent out to take photos of agricultural America and then take those photos back to DC so senators and U.S. representatives could decide how they were going to distribute monies and where, again, during the Great Depression. And so the editor of this film project, his name is Roy Stryker. And if Roy Stryker didn't like a negative and it wasn't moved on, he'd punch a hole through the negative, right? So he'd kill the negative, right? And so, but the Library of Congress kept all these killed negatives, of course, as well as the very famous photos and the photos that weren't killed. And so Joel's idea, right, is to he's collected these negatives from all over the country. And he's redrawing, he's rendering these illustrations, and he's amazing. I'll send you some of his work. And I'm gathering a group of poets to write ekphrastic poems about these killed negatives, right? And so I literally 3 weeks ago, for a presentation that Joel and I had to give, he asked me to write a poem about a particular killed negative. And then this dude selling pecans in Alma, Arkansas, or Alma, Virginia, rather. So I had just done all this research, right? All this research about the killed negative that was of the same shoot.
Yeah.
But this one wasn't killed.
Yeah.
And you used it in this book.
It's awesome. Look at that circular thing.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's crazy.
And I love that illustration, by the way. I love that. That's cool.
That's awesome.
Yep, he's selling pecans, and I think it's Alma, Georgia, which was the piney woods are there. So most folks made their money from selling their pine to northern paper mills to make paper. And during that period, if you had 100 acres or less, you got forced off your land, you got bought out, and then you were left to hustle. So I imagine that this dude's daddy got bought out because blacks couldn't own much land, and he's going to the railroad station to sell peanuts, or pecans rather. And there's literally a story in this research, and then I'll get back to Opal, I promise. There's literally a story that I uncovered in this research that a doctor in Alma, Georgia, during this time period in which these photos were taken, a doctor found a low-brow Negro and sutured goat horns into his head. And he was a human marvel because they travel around the world and no one can find stitches. No one could find cuts. That this doctor was allegedly so good at this that no one could find the cuts until they took this black man with goat horns in his head and traveled him around the world like a freak show. Alma, Georgia, same period, same year as this kid selling pecans, right? So yeah, I needed to share that with you. I've been meaning to share that with both of you, but yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, for me, very quickly, Betty, there were encyclopedias in my house. There were those old, like the old Encyclopedia Britannica, red and blue. And there were, a big old Bible, right? Those were the books in my house growing up. But my auntie first took me to the library, I think, in first or second grade. And I never stopped going. As a matter of fact, I didn't stop. I was there almost every Saturday of my life from 6th grade through 10th grade, right? Every Saturday. And so I grew up and I dreamed in the library. And the books I got were from the library because we couldn't afford picture books are expensive. We just couldn't afford them. But I always had books and I was always reading. And I think I know that the first words, I think I fell in love with language because of my older siblings' music, that I could sing the Stevie Wonder lyrics or Jackson 5 lyrics before I knew how to spell the words, right? Then I fell in love with that power. And that's probably in part that word sound power, that's the phrase. That certainly is a part of why I write. Yeah, for sure.
Hey, Betty, I wonder if I can contribute that. As an
illustrator, yes.
I don't, a huge component of me doing art, even from childhood, was reading. I basically wanted to reproduce the books I saw in the library. Like Q, my folks, my folks couldn't afford to buy books, so we got a library card early. I still remember walking down on Greenwood Avenue in Corpus Christi, Texas, to the library. And so I had this desire to reproduce the books, the stories that I was reading as a child, which set me on my path. I have two incidents that I remember that contribute to that. Early on, and at one point in our life, and the timeline gets kind of hazy for me even after all these years, my brothers and we integrated to school in Florida. I heard the story years later that my mom brought the three of us to a school in Florida where my stepfather was stationed. And she tells a story about how she had us all there. We were all dressed up to register. And the woman said, "Ma'am, we don't have Negro students here at this school." And my mother said, "Well, you're going to take these three." And sure enough, I remember being in like an all-white class. All my classmates were white. But the jewel of that experience to me, I don't remember any overt instances of racism, but I do remember the SRA reading program.
Yes, me too.
I remember that. And it was the first time we had been, so we're in a school that had good books, good curriculum. It was a good school to be in. And I remember my enthusiasm about getting from the yellows to the blues to the olives. And once you got out of the primary colors, you were really getting into some good stuff. That planted in me a love for reading, that experience of having the SRA reader. The other was when my father, who my parents divorced when I was quite young, but my father was devoted to instilling me a love for reading because he was a reader. And when I'd visit him in the summers, he's the first person I knew that had like a study. Where you walked in the room, he had a record player, and then he had all these books from floor to ceiling books. And instead of going outside and playing, I just wanted to be in his library. It was a way to be close to him, and it was a way to be close to Najah talked about modeling. My father modeled reading to me, and it was a cool thing to do. It brought me closer to him. And, a lot of kids can probably relate to that. So he sent me the Ebony magazine pictorial history. It's a 3-volume set. It's classic. They're like $500 to buy them on, $900 to price them on eBay. But I had a set of those, Encyclopedia Britannica, but that 3-volume set introduced me to what Black folks were doing that I didn't know. The author and publisher was Lerone Bennett. I lived in those books. It was kind of like my first, so I learned about Cassius Clay and George Washington Carver, Shirley Chisholm. They had an art section, they had a political section, they had history. It was awesome. So I was the kid that whenever we went to somebody's house just to visit, I went straight to their books. Where are your books? And they would say, "Well, where's Skip? Oh, he's somewhere reading somewhere." That's my experience as far as reading. I still read a lot today, and I'm very grateful for those early experiences with the written word. And they have a lot to do. They filled in my desire for art as well.
Man, you know what's crazy, right?
What?
I mean, I hadn't thought about the SRA business in a minute, and you just sent me way back, fam. Like way back.
Me too. Back to 4th grade.
The SRA.
I wanted to get through them so that I could go on and read what I wanted to read, because the SRAs, I was like trying to like whip through those so I could actually read a book.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had that feeling too.
Yeah, and the colors.
Yeah.
And and I think too, Skip, you found some role models in books. Some
I did.
role models of color. Yeah.
I did. Yeah. So very early on, I didn't grow up with this sense of not knowing who Black people were. There wasn't a whole lot of mystery to me about, I didn't know about this person or Benjamin Banneker or George Washington Carver, Edward Bunch. I mean, I knew these things by fourth grade, fifth grade. So I grew up primarily in integrated schools. And so I didn't have that identity issue of not knowing who we were. I knew who we were. I knew who we came from. And so I had a certain confidence in maneuvering being a Black child in a predominantly white environment. So that was very beneficial for me.
I think that leads us into to one of my questions in terms of Opal, to ask you guys the choices you made to show Opal prior to the race massacre. When I first read the book, I was terrified that something would happen to Opal, something horrible.
Oh.
No, it was horrible because I loved Opal, and I did not want anything to happen to her, and she had this beautiful community and this beautiful family. So making that choice, but then going beyond that, I mean, one of you mentioned, I think maybe Skip, that the illustrations can be for adults and children. And I know that when you write a book, a children's book even, it's for the reader, which is usually an adult reader, and the child seeing and hearing that book. So can you talk a little bit about that and the choices you made in writing the book? And it's just a beautifully written story and very emotive. So talk a little bit about that, and then maybe beyond the story. I mean, I think you could use Opal even with high school kids or adults to make that next step to talking about, here's this community, what happens to it.
You've talked before about your focus on how to talk about difficult subjects to children.
Yeah. So earlier you were saying, maybe what our favorite passage or our favorite page was. And it was funny when Skip earlier was talking about the illustrations. That page that I've had it open to this whole time is because I had it open to this page, not only because of the illustrations, but also because of what you were just talking about, the interplay of where our story is located versus what we know happens, right? So in this section right here, Daddy and I waved at Dick Rowland as he left his Auntie Damie's. See you later, have a good day. Dick isn't going the wrong way, the picnic's that way. No, he's gonna go work at the shoe shine parlor on Main. And then fast forward to the end of this page where Opal and her dad are here talking, and she says, Dad says over there they do things a lot different on that side of town. And she says, how do they do things? And he said, that's a long talk for another day, right? So Q and I played a lot with like giving people an in to tell more of the story. There are at least half a dozen places where adults have a chance to tell more of the story. And that is a place that I really like, because basically Dad's like, I mean, because segregation, but right now is not the time that I'm going to sit down and like break segregation down to you. But if you have this book in your home, right, after you've read it 5 or 6 times, we know how kids are. There are books in that room that's my daughter's like, let's read this one. And I'm like, we've read that 85 times. I'm not reading it again. Right. But so if you have this book in your home, there's a point where you're like, okay, let's actually talk about what they're talking about right here. And then you can talk about how once upon a time there was segregation, right? And I think there was difficulty. There was a lot of push and pull. We talked a ton about, can we talk about it? Like, can we say what happened in Kids Speak? Is there a way to go there like without going there? But we don't really believe in like lying to kids, but then however you're gonna put it out there it's gonna be sticky. Like we went back and forth, and we landed on that foreshadowing. And we're like, you're just gonna have to teach it. If you're a teacher, you're gonna know how to foreshadow, you're gonna know how to teach it, right? And then if you're a parent, hopefully you know, and if you don't know, there's resources. Ask us, we'll give you the resources, right? Because there's so much more. And you know, we weren't there, we don't know, but I think we like to think that it might have gone down something like that. Like the Black people had to know something was up, right? Go ahead, Q.
Well, I don't have much to add there. You know, we know that Carol Boston Weatherford and Floyd Cooper, two giants in the children's book world, have released a book. I think it's called Regrettable, and it is a book about the massacre. I've yet to see it. I need to get my hands on it. But it's a book that is literally about the massacre, and it's written for around the same age range as Opal. It'll be interesting to see how they tackle the actual massacre. But what we wanted to do, you know, is just to piggyback very briefly, because there's not really much to add to what Najah just said so eloquently, is, you know, introduce what Greenwood was, and then give everyone hints at the trouble brewing as platforms, as Najah said, to engage in those difficult conversations. And again, as Betty, as you and I've talked about for weeks, a part of what our struggle is as adults, but it's a necessary struggle, is how do we engage in difficult conversations about difficult subjects with our young people? It's tough enough to have difficult conversations about difficult subjects with adults, right? But you know, but how do we do that with our young people? It's something that we have to do. And I think what we want, this book sort of gets to it, gives you some platforms to it as a parent, as a teacher, as some stepping off points, and then you can go from there in a way in which you are comfortable.
This page right here is, for me, it's a powerful one.
I love that.
Yeah. You see him running. We know what he's running from, but Opal doesn't. So the contrast between the two, this is a very powerful page to me. And I purposely made it minimal in that primarily you see the color yellow. And then you contrast that with the white figures in white, house in the background, and then even Dick's shadow as he's running. To me, it's the most powerful pages on the book for what it doesn't say and what it says in basically condensed, minimalized form. And then I have like little clues in there, like she's holding, I think that's Osage.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Tomatoes, and I throw references in there. I try to throw a local record, but that for me is, if I were as a child to turn the page and see that, I would say, Mama, why is he running?
Mm-hmm.
What's he running from?
Mm-hmm.
That's an opportunity for a parent who's reading, a family member who's reading the book, a teacher who's sharing the book, to approach what he's running from. Why is Dick running? Why is little Dick running?
Right.
That's an end for you to, because a child's going to ask you, why is he running?
Right.
I think that is such a good point, Skip. And I think Najah, of course, as a teacher and a parent, those teachable moments, as we call them, you know, we need to listen for those and watch for those so that we can be there for our children as the adults to discuss these difficult topics. I think we're at the end of our time. I hate it because I have a lot more things I want to talk to you guys about. You were amazing, wonderful guests. Please buy the book. Where can people get the book?
Well, thank you for mentioning that, because Sean sent us all messages that none of us spoke publicly yet, but I will speak it now. You can buy the book at thecalliopegroup.com, and it's 20% off until the end of February. So you get the February Black History Month 20% discount if you go to thecalliopegroup.com before the end of February.
So everyone gets the Black History Month hookup.
Yeah.
Yep, there you go.
It's a beautiful, beautiful book, beautifully written, beautifully illustrated. Congratulations to all of you. It's a wonderful book. Please buy it. And thank you for being here. I want to thank all of you. I also want to thank OSU Tulsa and Tri-City Collective for their partnership in this series. And I hope everyone will join us next month, same day, same time. And we'll be talking again about some fun topics and have a great conversation. So thank you again. I'm Betty Casey from TulsaKids Magazine, and I appreciate your time.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, Betty, and TulsaKids Magazine.
Thanks.
Have a good one.